Hello and welcome to Lofty Pursuits and Public Displays of Confection in Tallahassee, Florida. This is Greg, and today we're going to be working on our next set of designs for our Christmas mix, and we're going to be doing little Santa hats and hard candy. Since this year I'm exploring Christmas icons, it makes me wonder what's the origin of the Santa hat? Since each batch of this Christmas assortment we're making a little different, the flavors may vary. Well, that's not exactly true. We'll have the same flavors in all the mix. Peppermint, spearmint, eggnog, cherry, and orange. But the artwork may change, and in this case we decided to use peppermint in these Santa hats, and we already flavored it ahead of time. It makes a beautiful smell for the store that can be smelled outside the door. I love that the scents of Lofty Pursuits change by the season. This design is only a two-color design, so we're going to start with the red and the clear will become white down the line. You'll see what happens. But we need to separate the two colors, and that creates the palette of colors that we use for this candy. This table I'm working on is a candy cooling table, and it's doing its job. It's cooled the candy where it's touched the table, but the insides are still warm and liquid, and we pour it out to even out the temperature. With Santa Claus's hat, we have to acknowledge that Santa Claus varies tremendously around the world, from country to country in Europe primarily. The earliest origins is Sinterklaas from the Dutch, and this may be the most accurate one, representing Saint Nicholas, the bishop, because this character wears a bishop's hat. And this bishop's hat, while very different than the Santa hat I'm making, is part of the origins of the Santa hat. The Santa hat is an amalgamation of religious icons and British Victorian imagery. Since the equipment we're making the candy on dates back to the Victorian period, I kind of like the Victorian origins of this hat. It ties in well with what we do at Lofty Pursuits. I've loaded the amber sugar onto the sugar pulling machine and I'm aerating it, folding in air bubbles to make it white. The air bubbles will reflect the light, the candy will become white, which I'm going to use for the background of this design. Long before there was a Santa Claus in modern culture, this hat existed. In ancient Rome, it's called the Phrygian cap. It was considered an aspect of Libertas, the Roman god of freedom, and it was worn by freed slaves, so it was a common sight with the flippy little tip. It also had the advantage that it was easy to make, and it showed up through the ages and still used for its liberty function, like during the French Revolution it was a sign of liberty. But for most of history, it just became a nice hat to wear. Before central heat, it was common to wear hats to bed, as often depicted in images related to the book A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. This hat was popular for men to sleep in the Victorian period. But this leaves a question to me about how the pom-pom gets on the end as I make the pom-pom. A cylinder of white sugar has been wrapped with red, and that's going to be the pom-pom for the top of the hat. So how did the pom-pom get added? Scholars seem to think that the origin of the pom-pom dates back to St. Nicholas or Sinterklaas. You see, St. Nick was a priest and eventually a bishop. There's a type of clerical hat called a biretta that is known for its pom-pom on the top. With the candy, we're jumping to the other side of the hat, and we're now making the white fringe on the bottom. We also wrap it in red. If you want to try this Christmas assortment for yourself, please go to our website, www.pd.net. You'll find it online along with our other candies that we make like candy canes, and we ship worldwide. Of course, if you live in or you're driving close to Tallahassee, you can visit us in person. We're located right off I-10 on the Thomasville Road exit. We're right now pulling the red with a little white. The inside of the top of the cap should be red and sort of a pinkish to contrast with the outline, and we're making that pink on our candy hook. Now we're going to shape the red into a triangle, and we're going to wrap it with a dark red outline. This hat is an origin of several things. It is what the Victorians would have seen as a nightcap, and that may be appropriate, because you would wear something like pajamas around your house but not out in public, and a nightcap, while not worn out in public, would be worn in people's houses at night, and since Santa goes around to everybody's house, wouldn't it be appropriate for him to be comfortable? The pom-pom comes from the connection to the religious origin of the symbol which became Santa Claus, even if Santa himself is not truly a religious symbol at the moment. I once heard somebody from a European country refer to the American Santa Claus as the patron saint of capitalism. So a Victorian British tradition gets combined with a European tradition, and in America gets added to the end of a hat to define Santa Claus. And I think this is pretty cool how the different cultures combine. But it doesn't stop there. It's now time for the American tradition to be exported. Now that we built the hat in sugar, it's time to wrap it in white and later in outer stripes. This log of candy is going to make about 5,000 bite-sized pieces in a moment, but we're going to have to scale it down first. The modern Santa tradition did not exist back in Europe in the same way, so it got exported from the United States to England and changed the tradition that was there. The British Father Christmas was originally in green and still can be seen that way in some places, although the American red has taken over. There were all sorts of traditions across Europe, and most of them weren't directly influenced, but they would all have tinges that were changed by the American Christmas and the marketing capabilities. There is a myth that the red Santa Claus was created by the Coca-Cola Corporation, but he existed before that because red was the color of royalty, and the outfit he was wearing was actually a Victorian frock coat that old men in the Victorian period would have worn. You can see this outfit on Disney's character Uncle Scrooge, based off the Dickens character, to show how out of date he was in modern culture. But that's not to say that Coca-Cola did not jump on the bandwagon because the colors of Santa Claus roughly matched their brand colors, and they did popularize the Santa image with a series of paintings they made and widely distributed. Santa continued to get exported, and it went to non-Christian and non-Western cultures. Some cultures, like Brunei, did not accept it. It's actually illegal to wear Santa outfits in Brunei, or to depict the old jolly guy publicly. From what I can tell, it was actually starting to be used for marketing there. But China is where I find Santa the most amusing. Since China doesn't have a Christmas tradition, they created one. Christmas gifts are given, and decorations are put up in China. But the strange thing I find is that Santa Claus in China is almost universally depicted with a saxophone. Yes, a saxophone. Jolly old Nick playing tunes on a jazz saxophone. So the swinging Nick plays the sax in China and is hopefully pumping out those tunes I like to listen to. That bit on the end that we cut off we call a unicorn dropping. Don't worry, it doesn't go to waste. We bag it up and we sell it in our store. We do not sell it mail order, but it's popular for crushing up and using to make all sorts of Christmas cookies and other goodies, and all that we make are sold locally, or to tourists visiting our shop. This 25-pound log of candy gets scaled down into about half-inch rods. We use a batch roller that dates back to the first decade of the 20th century, and it keeps the candy moving and keeps it from going flat as we pull it. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to us here on YouTube and ring that bell. If you'd like to hear more from Greg, you can listen to his podcast called Lofty Pursuits that you can download wherever podcasts are found. But if you want to get it 4 weeks early, you can become a Patreon subscriber on Patreon. And thanks to our Patreon subscribers for their support. Now that the rods are scaled down, all that's left to do is to cut them into bite-sized pieces. And remember, if you want to get this, you can get it in our store in Tallahassee, Florida. It's part of our 2019 Christmas assortment, and you can get that at www.pd.net, and we ship worldwide. So in doing research on the use of pom-poms on hats, I discovered that the pom-pom stopped being fashionable in the 1800s. By the 1800s, only the clergy, some military people, and old men were wearing pom-poms on their hats. It stayed out of fashion until the 1960s, and it came back into fashion because of the actions of one man, Michael Nesmith, from the Monkees, the 60s rock band. And this hat here brought them back, and they've stayed popular ever since. And now that we're done cutting, we have approximately 5,000 tiny Santa hats. Hats that symbolize a bishop and hats that symbolize a nightcap from the Victorian period. A combination of cultures and times. Thank you for watching, we do appreciate it. Please subscribe to us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for more updates. On Facebook we have 2 pages, PD Confection, which is our page for candy making, and Lofty Pursuits, which is the page about our store. On the PD Confection page, we do occasional live streams. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.